One of the things that is amazing to me when I hear about some people on the right talk about foreign policy is that the basic idea of deterrence is going completely by the wayside. It's as though the only two policy options, and this was sort of the binary that used to have Barack Obama suggesting all the time. There's this binary of appeasement or full-scale war. Mm-hmm. Those were the only two possible outcomes, right? This is what you used to say about Iran. Well, what do you want? You want us to just go to war with Iran? Is that what you want? World War III? And it was like, no, I don't want you to sign an appeasement-oriented, ship billions of dollars deal to Iran. And I also don't want you to go to war with Iran. But the best way to prevent the war with Iran is to make clear to them that if they step over this line, you're going to clock them into next week. You know, that is what deterrence is. I mean, if we had taken the same policy during the Cold War, we would have lost. If the policy during the Cold War had been, we either appease or we go to World War III until we appease, the Soviet Union would still be in existence.
I want to back up to the foreign policy stuff because you mentioned three fires there, three different parts of the world, three fires. Do you think this administration has any coherent policy as it relates to any of those situations or foreign policy in general?
No, this administration
is there a policy? What is our policy in general? I don't think anyone knows.
No one knows. I mean, I think that Biden wants to make sounds about America being a powerful force in the world, but he doesn't want to put his money where his mouth is. So he simultaneously wants to pull out of Afghanistan, but then he wants to suggest that he is in favor of projecting American power and that we are still the global leader in preserving the so-called global order and all the rest of this sort of stuff. And that has led him down all of these bizarre blind alleys. Today, most recently, the State Department putting out sort of trial balloons about preemptively declaring a Palestinian state in the aftermath of this war, which is totally crazy. I mean, that's literally rewarding the exact people who perpetrated October 7th and people who side with them and giving them a reward for that, which obviously is going to incentivize tremendous further violence. Now, those sorts of trial balloons are just, his policy in the Middle East is predicated on a couple of great lies. One is the centrality of the Israeli-Palestinian issue to broader peace in the Middle East. Same lie that the Obama administration was predicated upon. And the second lie is that if you make nice with Iran, if you're conciliatory toward Iran, if you don't slap them down when they get arrogant, then probably they'll be nice to you. And of course, that didn't work out well for Barack Obama in any way, shape, or form. And it's not going to work out well for Joe Biden. When it comes to China, Biden's policy has been completely at odds with itself. On the one hand, you've seen them take some economic measures against China and trying to box China in. On the other hand, they've been extremely conciliatory toward Xi, not wanting to offend him to the extent that he makes a hard move against Taiwan, when really what we should be doing is fortifying Taiwan against the possibility of that hard move and building up our military strength, particularly in the South China Sea. We have to project over there. I mean, we have to have naval power that is capable of projecting to break a blockade, because in all likelihood, China doesn't actually attack Taiwan. If they actually were to attack Taiwan, Taiwan just fries the microchips, and then China's invading for nothing. What they really are probably going to do is enact a blockade around Taiwan, shut down the Taiwan Straits, and then shut down global shipping and basically say, if you give us the microchips so that we have military parity in terms of technology with the United States, then we will release the blockade. And then the question is going to be whether the West is willing to brave that blockade. If it comes to like a shooting war over the blockade, is the United States willing to do that sort of stuff? But again, now would be the time to signal to China that they better not do it. Now would be the time to put a couple of aircraft carriers in the South China Sea, for example, and say, like, if you try this sort of thing, we are willing to fight you over it, not in terms of full-scale World War III war, but in terms of deterrent power. Again, one of the things that is amazing to me when I hear about some people on the right talk about foreign policy is that the basic idea of deterrence is going completely by the wayside. It's as though the only two policy options, and this was sort of the binary that used to have Barack Obama suggesting all the time. There's this binary of appeasement or full-scale war. Mm-hmm. Those were the only two possible outcomes, right? This is what you used to say about Iran. Well, what do you want? You want us to just go to war with Iran? Is that what you want? World War III? And it was like, no, I don't want you to sign an appeasement-oriented, ship billions of dollars deal to Iran. And I also don't want you to go to war with Iran. But the best way to prevent the war with Iran is to make clear to them that if they step over this line, you're going to clock them into next week. You know, that is what deterrence is. I mean, if we had taken the same policy during the Cold War, we would have lost. If the policy during the Cold War had been, we either appease or we go to World War III until we appease, the Soviet Union would still be in existence. So deterrence is the fundamental national security framework upon which all post-World War II policy is built. So because World War II essentially was a failure of deterrence in the first place.
What do you make of the split on the right related to this? Because I would say Tucker tends to be in more of the camp that you're talking about right there, where to me it's you speak softly and you carry a big stick. I'm more in agreement with you on deterrence. That's what stops the really bad things from happening. But there clearly is a lot of energy in that Tucker world, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the United States is blessed by God with the greatest geography of any country on the planet. I mean, we are largely self-sufficient economically. We have seas on two sides, Canadians in the north and Mexicans in the south. I mean, like we are uniquely blessed in terms of geography, and thank God for that. But that doesn't mean that foreign policy doesn't impact us. I mean, if the freedom of the seas goes away, you are going to feel that. I mean, shipping containers, for example, are twice as expensive as they were a few months ago before the Red Sea was being shut down. Everybody was shipping around the Cape of Good Hope. Now, that may not sound like a big deal to people, but it is a big deal to people who are actually living on the margins in American society who have to pay more at the store. I understand the impulse to suggest, like, why are we involved over here? And you know what? I think that's a great question to ask in all circumstances. Why are we involved? And somebody should then give an explanation of why we're involved that involves not just some sort of highfalutin moral language, but also involves like hard, real American interests. Like, why are we involved in this place? But to pretend that America does not have interests abroad at all, or that every potential deterrence is an act of escalation toward war, is I think, a giant misread of American foreign policy.
Do you blame some of that Tucker America First energy on the fact that so many Republicans helped get us to some of these stupid wars over the last 3 decades? That was going to be the result? That wasn't going to be much of a thought-out policy? It would just be an impulse policy, sort of as you're describing?
I mean, that's usually how politics works, right? It's actually mostly a series of impulses by the voter, which is why you'll see the American voters swivel wildly from, I don't want to be involved in this area of the world, to, we need to go in there and wreck everyone. Right? And we swing wildly from one side to the other. Right? Let's get out of Iraq. We need to get out of Iraq. Like, right now, we have no business in Iraq. ISIS beheads somebody, and we're like, okay, let's go wreck those bastards, right? Like the swivel from one to the other is very, I mean, it's pretty typical of American foreign policy, actually. And so there's nothing new about that. But that doesn't mean that actually makes for a smart deterrent policy. And one of the big problems with deterrence as a policy is that it's literally impossible to see the what would have been if not.
Right.
If you successfully deter a country from going to war, then by necessity, you don't see the war that would have materialized in the absence of the deterrence. And so, listen, I totally understand the impulse. I certainly understand the reaction to the war in Iraq and its failure. I understand the reaction to the lack of a functional plan in Afghanistan. Like, all of that is totally understandable. It's also possible to swivel too far in the other direction in terms of isolationism, right? The answer to full-scale interventionist Wilsonian neoconservatism, I don't think is isolationism. I think that it's foreign policy realism. So, for example, we have to look at every conflict and say, is this a conflict where we have an interest? For example, did we have an interest in getting ourselves involved in Libya? I would argue we had no interest in involving ourselves in Libya. Did we have an interest in helping foment the Arab Spring? I would argue that we had virtually no interest in many countervailing interests in fomenting the Arab Spring, for example. Like, there are many foreign policy issues where you can say, like, this really is not our business, and frankly, we do it all the time. I mean, there's plenty of major foreign policy conflicts that are happening right now in Africa, for example, where the United States is not taking a forward-facing position. Asking the question as to why we should be involved in a place is fine, good, and useful. But when there's an answer, there actually is an answer. And to pretend that there's never an answer, or that everything that happens in the world is purely because it's blowback because of American policy in a region, and that if we just kind of got our fingers out of the pie, everything would be hunky-dory, I think is looking at the world through rose-colored glasses.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop screaming, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.